The technician tracked the object on radar. The object was traveling faster than a normal aircraft. Thinking the object might be an asteroid, the technician switched on a different radar screen. Now we see something coming in on a radar screen. The military police assigned to the site left and drove to investigate the object. Upon arrival at the object's landing location, the MPs observed a saucer-shaped craft on the ground, and two humanoid creatures were outside the craft. These creatures were not human, they were alien, and had this cylinder object they thought was a weapon. In 1959, a UFO landed at a remote, distant early warning radar site in northern Yukon Territory, Canada. The site was manned by U.S. Air Force and Canadian Forces technicians. The site was called Bar 2 and located at Shingle Point on the Arctic Ocean near 𝗪𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧 Bay. Now this is way up in Canada. During the early morning hours, a radar technician observed an object flying from the northwest. The technician tracked the object on radar. The object was traveling faster than a normal aircraft. Remember, this is 1959. Thinking the object might be an asteroid, the technician switched on a different radar screen, which confirmed the object was a controlled aircraft changing directions. The technician notified a supervisor, a U.S. Air Force captain. The captain contacted other radar sites along the dew line. Other radar sites confirmed the object was an aircraft. The captain notified the North American Air Defense Command at Ent Air Force Base, which was the newly formed command. NORAD was newly formed back in those days. Two F-102 fighter planes were dispatched from Elmendorf Air Force Base in Alaska. You gotta understand that this is a remote location. There wasn't any other Air Force bases around there. So several hundred miles away in Alaska was the closest air defense base available to launch aircrafts. The object being tracked eventually landed just north of the radar site. Although the site was manned by military police, there were no fully armed troops within 500 miles of the radar site. The commander of the site, a U.S. Air Force major, was initially told that the object could be a Soviet transport plane. Now, this is 1959. The Cold War had already started. We knew the Soviet Union was the enemy. Now we see something coming in on a radar screen that was changing directions and landed. And now this commander of the site is told this could be a Soviet transport plane. What would a Soviet transport plane be doing landing in a remote area up near 𝗪𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧 Bay in the Yukon Territory? An invasion. There's certainly a lot of scenarios that he thought about. The commander of the site sounded an alert and issued weapons to all 49 site personnel. The military police assigned to the site left and drove to investigate the object. The military policemen were armed with M2 carbines and .38 caliber revolvers. Upon arrival at the object's landing location, the MPs observed a saucer-shaped craft on the ground, and two humanoid creatures were outside the craft. They quickly notified through radio the command post, telling them that, hey, we don't have a Soviet transport plane here. That's the good news. The bad news, so to speak, is we got a flying saucer on the ground with two humanoid-looking creatures on the outside of it. Now, I'm joking somewhat, but that's basically what they had. The creatures were described as 4 foot tall, thin-built, wearing tight-fitting jumpsuits, silver in color. Both creatures wore dark or gray helmets. The creatures didn't seem interested in the MPs. One of the creatures was carrying a long cylinder device. Fearing the device might be a weapon, the MPs retreated to their vehicle and notified the site by two-way radio. However, the radio didn't work. Shortly afterwards, two F-102 fighter jets arrived in the area. These two jets were launched from Elmendorf Air Force Base to intercept this craft in the air, but of course now it's on the ground. The two creatures got back inside the saucer-shaped craft and it flew away. Since the 102s were launched from Elmendorf Air Force Base, hundreds of miles away, they had limited fuel, limited flight range. And since the 102s couldn't catch up to the UFO, they had to break away and return to base for refueling. Aircrafts from Canadian Forces Base Comox on Vancouver Island were launched to intercept the object. The radar site at 𝗪𝗠𝗧, British Columbia, started tracking the UFO, but the object was eventually lost on radar. The newly formed NORAD investigated this incident in June of 1959. Writing a report and submitting it to Headquarters Air Force, the radar tapes and photographic evidence was submitted. Project Blue Book investigators flew to 𝗪𝗂 and conducted an investigation. This case was on one of the 55 in Project Blue Book files that was classified as top secret. So we had Blue Book back in those days. It originated in '52. Before that was Project Sign and Grudge. So we had UFO investigators, Blue Book investigators, that wanted to investigate this site and this incident, determine what actually happened. And so all the information pertaining to this particular site incident at 𝗪𝗂 was classified top secret. The official report released stated the object was a Soviet transport plane that got lost in bad weather. The only problem was that there was only one airport in the area, and that airport, Barter Island Airport, 10 miles away, was closed during this time. The U.S. Air Force had not released a full report, only a heavily redacted document. So what actually happened at 𝗪𝗂? The Air Force gave out a story that, the site was, didn't really identify what happened. The military policeman misidentified the flying saucer as a Soviet transport plane. Back in those days, the Soviets didn't have many advanced cargo planes that could fly great distances. And some smart people figured out, in order for that Soviet transport plane to fly from the closest base inside the Soviet Union over the Arctic Circle and land at the base or near the site, they would have to have flown 2,700 miles without refueling. There wasn't any aircraft in the Soviet arsenal that could do that. This is a document, the history of the DEW line, or the distance early warning radar sites, from 1946 until 1964. Lo and behold, in this document contained some information about this incident at 𝗪𝗂. But again, as you can see, it's redacted. The classification is redacted. The date is there, June of 1964, but everything else is redacted. I'm not going to show you the other pages because guess what? They're all redacted. Pertaining to 𝗪𝗂. Okay, let's talk about what really happened at 𝗪𝗂. There was a person assigned to 𝗪𝗂, a Canadian Forces sergeant, that is still alive. He's still alive today. He was 18 years old when he was assigned to 𝗪𝗂. And he's in his 90s now. But he talks about what happened at 𝗪𝗂. And we're going to relate to you what he told us. It was a heavily fogged day when this craft landed. It created a lot of stir among site personnel. And remember, there were 49 personnel, military personnel, Canadian and U.S. Air Force, assigned to the site. He said, we saw what it was. We saw on radar, the radar signature showed that this was not an airplane. This was a round disc-shaped object that came in to the radar range area. They identified it as something non-identifiable, bogey, so to speak. It wasn't an Air Force or any kind of conventional aircraft that they could detect on a radar screen. And the radar, even back in those days, knew what a conventional aircraft looked like and knew what the signature or what was appearing on the radar screen was. And this was not a conventional aircraft. It was a flying saucer. It landed. He was in the operations center when the two military policemen returned and spoke with the commander and were scared to death. They said that these things, these creatures, were not human. They were alien. And they had this cylinder object they thought was a weapon. And now this is where it gets really interesting, because one of the military policemen fired his weapon. He fired his handgun, not his rifle, but his handgun, which was a .38 caliber revolver. He fired this weapon at the creature, carrying the cylinder. So now we have a discharge of a firearm at this creature, but the creature didn't seem to be harmed in any way. In fact, the senior military policeman said it seemed to him like the bullet went right through that creature. Now, if we were to read everything in this document, go through this entire document, it's going to explain everything that happened at Bar 2 near McKenzie Bay in 1959. But we're not able to do that. The Air Force is still keeping this from us. Now, we're talking about disclosure. Let's open up files, all the different incidents that have occurred in the past. Historical accounts of UFO landings and contacts, such as this contact. Why not? Let's open this up. Let's have the Department of Defense Inspector General's office given access to this information. Let them go in front of a congressional committee or a Senate committee and report this. Let's talk about these things. They gave gun sight videos of the incidents happened at Nimitz and Roosevelt. That's recent stuff. Let's talk about what happened back in the 1950s and 1960s. Let's talk about the incident at Bar 2. Let's talk about a confrontation that occurred between a military policeman and an extraterrestrial, where the military policeman fired his gun at that extraterrestrial, but nothing happened. The bullet went through. Didn't seem to harm the extraterrestrial. But we don't know that. Why? Because the ETs got in their craft and flew away. The F-102s and later on the Canadian Forces F-101s couldn't catch up to this craft. If it was a Soviet transport craft, we could have overtaken it. In fact, it would still be on the ground because it would have ran out of fuel. So we would have had it on the ground. And in captivity, the Soviet crew members. The Air Force report doesn't talk about the Soviet transport plane, or where it went, or how it was refueled, or how it took off. If it was there on the ground, it would have had to refuel because it would have had to come from a great distance to get there. There wasn't any Soviet transport plane. This incident involved an extraterrestrial craft that landed at this radar site for some particular reason. We don't know why. Why did it land there? Maybe it was drawn there by the signals being emitted by our radar system. Maybe that's the answer. Maybe they were drawn there by frequencies, radio frequencies. Now, radar operates on frequencies. Maybe that's what drew them in there. Or maybe they were just curious. What was this radar site? What did Earth-based creatures have down there. So they went down there to investigate themselves. And lo and behold, they get confronted by Earthlings, one of them firing some kind of a weapon at them. We don't know anything other than what I just told you. But if we could get this document and get it unredacted through this disclosure that we're supposed to have, we can learn more about what happened there and at other locations around the Earth. I hope you enjoyed this presentation on the incident at Bar 2. Until next time, this is Richard Doty. Thank you for watching.
If you liked this video and you want to see more amazing content, go ahead and check out the next video on our channel.